getting on to our next speaker, another student here at STEM. Our next speaker is currently a freshman here at the STEM Academy. Kashti Umare was born in a little village in India, but has lived mostly in the developed world. But she thinks she shares a history in what she would like to consider a developing world.
Every few summers, she travels back to her village of Balarsha in India and learns a little more every year with age. She in her free time likes to work on projects she does out of interest and likes to read. She enjoys classical novels and history and thinks that her own history has given her a peculiar interest in language. Today, in her talk titled Dr. English, she'll be talking about personal effects that she has seen due to language and outcomes that result in things you might not think of. Please welcome to the stage, Kashti Umare.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out of your Saturday to be here. My name is Kashti Umare, as they just stated, and I would like to begin by talking about myself, every teenage girl's favorite thing to do. So, a few summers ago, in 6th grade, I thought I could read classical literature. So I picked up Franz Kafka's Metamorphoses. Turns out I can't read that, but the one thing I learned from that experience was the word Kafkaesque. And I didn't even read that from reading the book. I found that on an online plot summary. Thank you, SparkNotes. But what happened with that one word was I had a better understanding of the definition. Kafkaesque. Basically, it means being a cog in the wheel of society. Now, I'd used that before, and I thought of that feeling, but I never fully understood what it meant. After learning the word, I started to use it so much more. Whether it's when I go swimming and I see everyone with their disgusting black tinted goggles and think, oh my gosh, how can you wear those? That's so Kafkaesque. Because when I wear those disgusting goggles, I just see an extremely monotone, mechanical world, and it makes me sad. So that's why my goggles are bright blue. But anyway, that's how language affected me. I started using the word more, I started thinking it more, and I started understanding just the feeling of that. But it's impacted other people in much, much more tremendous ways. My stories all come from my little village of Balarsha, and, well, let me just give you a quick overview of that first. Right there, that's India. In the red, that's Maharashtra, my state. This is the state map itself, and right around there is my little village of Balarsha. We're poor. We're pretty poor. As you can see about here, there's a little guy in his scooter right there, and there's a bunch of school children walking to school. They probably go to Marathi medium school. In my village, we have 3 levels of language, as we do in most of India. There's your village language, which there's about 22 of around the country, and about 7,000 dialects. But the dialects vary from about trying to understand French while knowing English, and if anyone has taken a language class, they know how hard that is. But, and then there's Hindi, which is the national language. If your state has a language, maybe that comes next, and then there's English, which trumps them all. These are children that go to English medium schools. As you can see, they all are dressed nicely, but the environment around them also looks to be dead in poverty. Just hellscapes, another view of the village just to give you a better idea. More people. That right there is my old house. That's where my dad grew up, as you can say, Umare family. And that's our house, kind of like the other ones you saw before. We have coal mines in Balarsha. That runs a pretty big part of our economy. It's considered rich to be working there, considered rich to be a miner. The coal mines produce so much pollution. We're one of the most polluted cities in the world, and living there is about equivalent to smoking 25 cigarettes a day. We have our paper mills, which suck countless people into them when they suck water from the river. Some children go swimming, and then boom, they're dead. But that's the pollution that comes from it. So as you've probably gathered by now, we're not the best place to live in the world, but I like it there. I like to consider us emerging third world. third world itself is something like the people in that area consider rich what we consider poor. For us, what we consider middle class is what they consider rich, but the majority of our population is poor. We have our beautiful built homes for people that work in the paper mills, and those are, well, in there it looks beautiful, but you've seen what it looks outside. So, I'd like to begin with the story of a man that lives just a few doors down from us. What happened to him was, he went to school in Belarsha. He went to Marathi medium school. We have medium schools in India. How it works is the medium is obviously the medium you're taught in, which is basically the language that primarily everything is taught in. So, his name was Kapil, and there was another man named Lalu. Both of them, they went to Marathi medium schools. In 10th grade, which is the year that matters the most in India, they got high marks, they got 80s and 90s. Their parents were overjoyed. These children were going to turn their poor family into middle class. Suddenly, they saw light, they saw hope, they saw a future for their family. They took out thousands of dollars in loans, that money that could feed them for countless years, in hopes that this investment would suddenly give them security in life. Their sons, they went to engineering school with no knowledge of English, and let me tell you, engineering school is taught completely in English. And what happened from that was, the first test they went in, they tried to memorize everything they could from their textbook of engineering in English, and if anyone knows, if you're trying to learn math, if you're trying to learn science, you can't just memorize it. They failed out just because they didn't know the language. And that affected a little more than just failing out of college, which is pretty bad in itself, but their parents, all that money, gone. Their hopes gone. Everyone in the village laughs at them now because, well, they weren't smart enough to survive college. What does that mean? That means they're worthless. Their self-esteem's gone. Everyone sees them as useless. That didn't do very well for them. They went to polytechnic school. One of them's a plumber, the other's an electrician. They're still poor, they still live there. Now, think about what happened to them. What affects them now? They both have children, and the most important thing them for their child is sending them to an English medium school, because that will guarantee their child a future. Their parents thought that, they think that, their children are going to think that. Because English is what kept them from going on, so they're going to send their children to English medium schools. Now, India has this little program where they have local schools in local languages. They're trying to preserve culture, and as people in the first world, we know how important it is to preserve culture. But to people there, what matters more than preserving culture, this idea, is getting their next meal, is securing a future for their family, so that they can make sure they can provide for each other. And that is worth much more than preserving culture, so the local school is boarded up. The Marathi medium school in my village is boarded up. No one goes there. No one sees any value. Because what they want is English. They're going bankrupt to send their children to English school to secure them a future. Now take my aunts, for example. All three of my aunts are teachers. Now, why is that? They're all in the village, and they're teachers because that's what's taught in Marathi, because they don't know English well enough to do anything else. Because to any sane person, a quick way to get money is to do something science-related, because in India especially, engineering is gold. It will get you money fast, you'll be able to quickly, efficiently get money. But they do arts majors because that's what's in English. They're school teachers because that's what's in English. It's not very successful. They're doing okay. A lot of people are smarter than millions of people that speak English, but they're stuck. They're stuck in this little hole, carved by society in order to succeed. We will lose culture, and they think it's okay. What happens is later on, English affects more than just the societal values. Later on, when people go to college, they see people that learn in English as rich people. If you speak English, you are rich. And you happens there? Well, a lot of the poor people are trying to emulate the rich. They're trying to emulate what they want, which makes complete sense, which I guess I would do too. But that leads them into drugs and alcohol. These people that can barely afford their next meal, they're spending all their money drinking underage. And, well, one day they're going to go back to their village once college is over. And then they're going to become the alcoholics that are stereotyped, those horrible men that everyone thinks of. And, well, that cycle is going to keep continuing, just because they're forced to understand English, because that is more important than anything else. Because the most valued teacher in an Indian school is the English teacher. English is just overall killing culture. You've seen that in that it is killing cultural jobs, it's killing cultural languages. It's also killing cultural religion. Like, all the people that come to create these English medium schools, they're all missionaries. Spreading religion is great, but these parents don't want their children to become Christian. That's not what they're looking for. What's simply happening is all these parents are forced to send their children to Christian schools in order to gain English. They are losing their complete religion. Now, I can tell you, when I go to India, the first thing my grandmother does is she calls over all her neighbors and she asks me to talk in English. That's because that's what she values most. That is because that is what makes me smart, being able to speak English. That saddens me tremendously, but it makes her happy. What happens when I go over to my neighbor's house? One time I was telling my neighbor, oh, I can barely speak Marathi, because that's true, I can understand it, but speaking it is enormously hard for me. And she told me, that's okay, that doesn't matter. In this situation, being able to speak English is great. Just being able to speak English is great. You don't need any Marathi clouding up your language. Even when I talk to my grandmother and my little brother, who doesn't even utter a word of Hindi, and he's just speaking out there full English. He can barely communicate with her. Actually, he can't communicate with her. And what happens from there? She thinks that's fine. She thinks that's great. When we're all yelling at him to speak some Hindi, to try to pick up something, she says no, it's okay. Because he knows English. That's all he needs to know. Now, anyone logically knows that's wrong. In the third world, because all they value is the next, the future, the next day. We're looking at the next millennia. We're looking at preserving culture, preserving history. But think about how time values. I want everyone to think, in terms of language, as a poor person, pretend you are poor, pretend you have no money on you. Is preserving culture for the whole of humanity, for the whole of society, worth more? Or is getting your next meal worth more? Now, logically, as people in the first world, we'd say, preserving culture, preserving everything, preserving religion, we're going to lose all of this. But I know in that situation, no one would care. Does that really matter? You see, English has been digging multiple holes for everyone. It's been turning culture into language into chains that hold everyone in place. People are turning into the English people that had colonized them 60, 70, or 100 years ago, just in order to get rich, because Europe, English, that still is what holds value. And in order to get that, basically the slaves have to turn into the slave owners. That's sad. Anyone can agree with me on that. So please, I'm asking you with a depth in my heart. Google Translate if you have to, but please, try to communicate. Try to not force people into learning English, because that may be your mother tongue, but it is just as important to know theirs. It is just as important to be able to communicate with them as it is for them to be able to communicate with you. It is important to open up schools in local languages in order to give value to all of this. Because with something as simple as Google Translate, you can communicate with the whole world. So take advantage of that. Don't force the whole world to, in 100 years, be in English. Don't force people like me and my brother to, in a few years, lose our complete identity of where we came from. Because if we don't, in a few years, in a few decades, my brother's not even gonna know what happened. I'm not gonna know what happened in my village because I won't be able to communicate with anyone. I will lose my identity. And that is going to happen to countless, hundreds, thousands of people in a few hundred years. And in countries, in Africa, countries in Asia, villages everywhere. Please try to preserve humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashti. Are there any questions from the audience? Cool. Well, I have one for you, Kashti. So you mentioned that here in the first world, more developed countries, that we're all about preserving culture, but in lesser developed countries, they're more about learning English and trying to get a leg up. What do you think is the best way to find a balance between that, either here or in the developing world?
In the developing world, well, obviously it's going to take a pretty big effort, but we have to create less stigma around not knowing English and make it more common to teach or communicate or do higher education in local languages.